Are the other two judges here?
Yes.
All right, cool. I messaged Danny just to make sure that we're good to go or to start, so I'll just wait for a second. Back. I guess while we're waiting, if the debaters happen to have any questions for the panel, feel free to ask them.
Yes, would you guys prefer that we time ourselves?
That would be awesome.
Perfect. Okay, no worries.
I'd be good with that as well.
Cool.
Okay.
And then our third judge, Olivia, are you here? Sorry, I had to plug my tablet in.
No worries.
I guess let me also message Danny, but right, I just got confirmation that we're good to go. So whenever the competitors are ready, we'll let you take it away. But congratulations for
Thank
making
you.
this round. Should be a fun time.
All right. I believe I'm ready to start. So, can I just start? Or... Hello.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Just can't.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. I was like, you went away somewhere. All right, my apologies.
Yeah,
So,
it sounds good.
Okay, perfect. I'd like to start now. So, first, I'd like to thank my opponent and my judges for coming out. Congratulations to both my opponent and myself. You have made it this far. So big congrats to us. Big whoops. I'd like to now dive right into the resolution, which is that this house believes in a thing called love. I'd like to define love as a great interest and pleasure, or excuse me, I'd like to define love as to feel a deep romantic attachment to someone. And I'd like to define the value as being, I'd like the criteria to be value and for it to be weighed as quality of life. I'd like to now dive right into my first point, which is that scientists have backed the existence of love as means of evolution. So, according to neuroscientist Gabija Tolekibite, I totally butchered her name there, and biological anthropologist Helen Fisher, scientists have agreed that love is not something that can be controlled, created, or switched on and off, as many people seem to believe. It actually rises from the depths of our subconscious, and romantic love is a basic drive that evolved millions of years ago in order to enable us and focus our attention on just one partner, and therefore start mating. Love has been used as biological means to evolutionize and to create a larger population. I'd like to now dive right into my second point, which is that philosophers believe in love. Now, philosophers and their theories have been used to, in essence, create the modern day world, to create our government, to create our systems of functioning, and to kind of guide our thought process on things such as morality and principle and so on and so forth. So according to Plato, who is a very, very famous philosopher, thus great are the heavenly blessings which the friendship of a lover will bring on you or center on you. A little bit messy. This is a quote from Plato's work Symposium. What this basically means is that there are heavenly blessings that are placed down upon you, and those blessings are the friendship of a lover. This, in essence, means that love is a blessing pushed upon someone to further enhance their life. According to Bertrand Russell, another famous philosopher, to fear love is to fear life, and those who fear life are already 3 parts dead. Now, aside from this very interesting quote from Mr. Russell, what this is basically indicating to us is that love is the foundation of our day-to-day beings. Without love, who are we as humans? What are we capable of? What are we setting our minds to, really? Besides just the biological means that love is created in order to mate, love is what truly enhances our day-to-day lives. It's what centers a lot of our actions, and it's what pushes us forward. This therefore leads me to my third point, which is that love is the most powerful word in all languages. So according to a 911 call, 911 call delivered the day the Twin Towers crashed from someone named Jim Palmer, who was on one of the planes that crashes. Unfortunately, rest in peace. The biography states that Jim Palmer had been promoted and was spending his last day working in the Twin Towers when planes hit. As he managed to get through to his pregnant wife Jill and their 2-year-old daughter, he said as follows: "There's a fire. I love you. Tell Nicole I love you. I don't know if I'm going to be okay, but I love you so much." Now, these are heavy, heavy words that should be taken with deep consideration on what eventually would become his dying bed, something that he was clearly able to recognize. He didn't have regrets about what, things he didn't have. He didn't have regrets about who he didn't spend time with. All he wanted to share was that he loved his wife and that he loved his kid, his 2-year-old daughter, and I'm sure the kid that was soon to be on his way. What this, in essence, translates to me, and what I hope translates to the entire panel of judges, is that love is the greatest motivator of all. Love is the most powerful word in all languages, whether it be English, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, whatever it is that it may be. It is the word that pushes us. It is the emotion that drives us, and is what ultimately makes our lives as beautiful as they can possibly be. So with that, I succeed the rest of my time.
All right, before I start cross, mic check. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
I can hear you just fine.
All right, perfect. I'm starting time. I wanted to ask about your first contention. First, can you repeat the tagline for it?
Yes, of course. My tagline is that scientists have backed the existence of love as a means of evolution.
As a means of what?
Evolution.
Okay. Okay, that's actually kind of interesting. If it is an intrinsic thing, or rather, if it's something that's built into us, why does it need believing in? I'm just trying to understand your wording here.
I think that there are skeptics for anything that's said out loud, or I quite frankly even I think that as long as there's a statement, somebody's going to try to disbelieve it or discredit it.
Okay, so you're going about this resolution proving the mere existence of a concept. But what of the other definition of believe, which is to have confidence in or to value? What do you think of the relative worth of those two definitions?
I do believe that people can and do value love. As you stated, believe could be synonymous with value.
Philosophers. Just the obvious question. Not all philosophers believe the same thing, correct?
I'm sorry?
Not all philosophers believe the same thing, correct?
Sure, I think just like any human, they disagree.
Okay, so let's talk, for example, about solipsists. They believe that outside of your own mind, the existence of nothing else is provable. Are those philosophers part of the folks you're talking about in your second contention?
Well, I think what's really interesting about philosophy is that it, in many ways, can be subjective. I think that what philosophy's basic root cause is try to debunk the greatest questions plaguing man. I think that we all have different interpretations on what exactly those concepts or theories represent.
Okay, that's time. Thank you. I'll take a second to start, just a moment. Are the judges ready?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I Believe in a Thing Called Love should never have gotten popular. Released in 2003 by the British band The Darkness, the lyrics go, I believe in a thing called love. Just listen to the rhythm of my heart. There's a chance we could make it now. We'll be rocking till the sun goes down. So, it's a typical love song, and yet it's gotten inexplicably popular. So popular that the writers of this topic decided to reference it. Obviously, as we discuss, the resolution that the negative will be defending, that this house does not believe in a thing called love, we need to first define what that thing called love is. And when we actually look to the lyrics of the song, we realize that it references the popular notion that love is this uncontrolled thing. In short, the negative will be defining the thing called love as the belief in uncontrolled destiny. As for believing in, I take the definition of trust, faith, or confidence in someone or something. The reasons to prefer this framework of evaluating the round are twofold. First, believing in is incredibly subjective. Just because something exists in a metaphorical sense, it can be said to exist. Therefore, the resolution would have no meaning if we used my opponent's definition. But also, prefer my framework because love on its own can be anything. We must take our cue from the wording of the resolution and evaluate the social construct of love. Now, to understand why we shouldn't believe in a thing called love, we need to go through two reasons. First, so-called love can be isolated biologically. And second, the social construct of love denies agency. Now, 2 centuries ago, the guts had basically the same level of mystery. We thought that our feelings were controlled by humors, so yellow and black bile and phlegm. But as soon as the stomach and the digestive system became understood, all of that mystery faded. That's the first reason why we shouldn't believe in a thing called love, because we can isolate it biologically. As Kaiser Health News explains on April 12th of 2018, when people emerge from the anesthesia after surgery, they will have no short-term memory. So they'll talk to nurses or their family with the same looping conversation that repeats after 2 minutes as a person's memory wipes. In short, humans are automata. If you put them in the exact same situation with the exact same memories, they will say the exact same thing. This biological determinism is further explored by Scientific American on February 1st of 2011. When we use functional magnetic resonance imaging, we can actually distinguish attraction from unconditional love from maternal love. In fact, dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin are all well understood to play a role in creating the feeling that we all know and associate with love. Here's the thing. We have these things called connectomes, which are comprehensive maps of neurons in the brain, and we have them for mice. As soon as we have those, we basically can predict and understand every emotion they can have. So once we finish a connectome of the brain for humans, all feelings will be mapped, and the mystery will be gone. As the song continues, can't explain all the feelings that you're making me feel. My heart's in overdrive, and you're behind the steering wheel. But ultimately, disagreeing with that is the second reason why we shouldn't believe in a thing called love, because the social construct of love denies agency. As the American Psychiatric Society, or APA, explains on June 1st of 2013, people who remarry tend to have worse outcomes. So after you cut out the 50% of people who have divorced, a certain percentage of them will remarry and have less successful marriages. And the common observation in therapy is that those folks that think that relationships will work on their own, that love is a destined thing, and if you just let it happen, then things will work out. But the problem is that bad marriages take a toll on mental health and are an opportunity cost for children. But while we're talking about this, we should also talk about how people choose their marriage partners. We can think of it, unfortunately, as a caste system. As MIT explains on May of 2009, only 17% of marriages are interracial, and most are within the same income and education quartile. In India, this is explicit, where, for example, a person in the hand or warrior caste cannot even meet or touch someone from the untouchables. Thus, we have to recognize that the social construct of love as we inevitably believe it, where you have the storybook fantasy where everything fixes itself, ultimately we must tear it down. By tearing down the myth of uncontrolled, self-driving love, we can regain agency in our relationships. When C.S. Lewis wrote The Four Loves, he detailed how we treat friends, soulmates, and family differently. The negative does not argue that natural affections are bad. Instead, I urge us to recognize how damaging society's collective romantic fantasy is. Love exists and makes life worth living, but it's not a thing, and it doesn't need believing it. And with that, I turn to my opponent's arguments. First, let's look to my opponent's definition for believe. The unfortunate thing is that my opponent seems to think it's sufficient to merely say that love exists, either in a physical or metaphorical sense. But the same is true of literally everything. I could say I believe in the flying spaghetti monster, and that wouldn't be nearly as meaningful. My opponent also values the quality of life. But this is unfortunate because of two reasons. First, because the quality of life isn't actually related to the resolution. And second, if we look to the Independent on April 1st of 2017, there's actually a penalty. The stress of marriage shortens your life by a year if you're the wife. Ultimately, we have to recognize that marriage and love, as we fantasize about it, mirror existing inequalities. That's why we have to look to my opponent's contentions and recognize that my opponent's first contention can be linked to mine and turned. We can look to my opponent's second contention and realize that my opponent admitted that philosophy is subjective. Ultimately, love isn't a thing, and we don't need to believe in it.
Okay, 2 minutes across. 1 second. Okay, starting now. So, Mr. Opponent Igor, what exactly were your main points again? I didn't fully catch them. Hello?
Oh, did we lose him?
We did.
Might be having some internet issues. If you want to pause the cross-X time, probably.
Yeah, I paused it. No worries. Oh yeah, he disappeared there.
Okay, I think he'll probably, hopefully, be able to add himself back in. I know that some people in other rounds had trouble connecting.
Okay, no worries.
All right, cool.
My 8x8 just crashed randomly. Does
No
it
worries.
mind if we restart cross-X?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Let's reset the time. Okay.
All right,
and-
great. I'm starting the time. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Igor, I think you made some very interesting points. However, I didn't fully catch all of what you said. You said that you had 2 points, and then you
That's
went
fair.
on to
Sorry.
list more. So I'm just having some difficulty.
So my first point was that we can isolate love biologically, therefore it isn't what we think it is. And second, that the social construct of love denies agency and creates worse outcomes.
Yes. And you said that it denies people of self-agency?
Yes. Well, not quite that wording, but I think people themselves take it and assume that they don't have agency in the face of love.
Okay. And this was under your definition of love as what exactly?
So the definition that I used, which is more specific than yours, I talked about love as being thought of as uncontrolled destiny.
And where was this definition from?
So I was taking it out of the lyrics of the song that this resolution was referencing.
Okay. Love is uncontrolled destiny. Okay. Okay. And you said, or you mentioned rats and centromes in regards
Yes,
to
the word was
brain activity,
connectomes,
yes?
a comprehensive map of
connectomes.
all the neurons in the brain. I argued that
Okay.
if we did the same for humans, all feelings would be mapped and the mystery would be gone.
Right, and rats and humans are essentially the same, is what you're saying then.
No, I'm
Correct.
not saying we're the same. I'm just saying that the fact that we were able to do it with rats and gain the understanding is telling of what kind of a revelation we're in for.
Right, but if by your reasoning, using or the utilization of rats to figure out how love isn't what we think it is cohesive, then we should be able to.
The time is ending, so I'll just answer quickly. I made an analogy of us thinking of our feelings coming from our guts when we didn't understand them, and then we had to throw that somewhere else once science revealed that was wrong.
Okay, got it. Okay, interesting. I haven't heard that one before. Okay, so 3 minutes of photo. Starting now. So again, thank you, judges, and thank you to my opponent. Oh, phone fell there. Thank you to judges and thank you to my opponent for coming out today. I think that my opponent made some very interesting points that I'd like to touch upon. I'd like to point out that a lot of what my opponent said seemed to be very theoretical. A lot of what my opponent said seems to be pointing to what his beliefs are and what his understanding of love is. I do like to note that love was defined by him as uncontrolled destiny, as it was in the song that it was referencing. So I will stay with that definition. But I do believe that my criteria of quality of life is actually very much intertwined by love, as he mentions social constructs time and time again, which quite frankly I think is off argument and off base. But moving back to my original points, using the definition of love that he said as uncontrolled destiny, I think that my first point likely strikes that out, as scientists have backed the existence of love as means of evolution. Again, science, something that my opponent liked to point out, that would completely discredit the notion of love, but leaving that aside. To my second point, that philosophers believe in love, which my opponent actually failed to touch upon, philosophers have been used many times or extensively to create society as we know it today. Philosophers' beliefs have influenced us for centuries to come, so that is to say that something that these scruffy old men are saying is actually worth listening to. I'd like to point again to Plato, who is a revolutionary for his time and is still considered as such, defined love or mentioned as love as the great heavenly blessings which the friendship of lover will censor of you. Again, as I stated, this is basically saying that love is a heavenly blessing that could fall upon anyone who chooses to receive it. Leading again to my third point, that love is the most powerful word in all languages. Again, something that my opponent refuted or failed to refute. I mentioned that, or I brought up the heartbreaking 911 call from someone stuck in the Twin Towers on the day of 9/11. Instead of choosing to say, as my opponent defined, "You are my uncontrolled destiny," he chose to say, "You are," or "I love you," and repeated that phrase multiple times throughout the call, as well as referencing his daughter and his unborn child. I think that what my opponent is basically trying to argue is that love is socially constructed and can therefore be picked apart by science. But I think that a lot of what he mentioned was the failures of love, especially specifically in the terms of the social construct that has been created. I think that anything constructed with the wrong kind of framing can be damaging. I think that anything created with the wrong intentions could be damaging. But as I have repeatedly stated, love is not one of those things. Love is not only scientifically backed through philosophers and various scientists, but love is ultimately the greatest force of all. Thank you. Okay. Did my opponent go somewhere?
Igor, are you there? Did you? Yes, if you dropped again, you wouldn't be able to hear. Dropped again, I guess we shall see. I think his camera only went off in like the last 30 seconds of your speech.
Okay.
And so if you did lose that, then we'll have you, if the other judges are fine with it, just kind of re-summarize what you had just said.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Essence of fairness.
Back again.
Hi.
Oh, yeah. Okay. What was, did you catch?
It crashed again. It just went white.
Okay. What was the last thing that you catched?
I caught anything constructed.
Okay. So yeah, Af, if you just want to finish kind of from that point, just kind of re-summarize, that would be great.
Constructed. Yeah, sure. Should I put on the timer for 30 seconds? I was just running through my
It's just a brief summary. That's fine.
Yeah, I was just rerunning through my original points that scientists have backed. That scientists have backed the existence of love as a means of evolution. That notorious and revolutionary philosophers for their time believed in love, and that love is the most powerful word in all languages. So we can just
okay.
leave it at that.
Can you just briefly say what you said against my second contention? It said anything constructed by society, something, something.
Right. Anything constructed by society with the wrong framework is going to be hurtful.
Okay. Thank you. I'm really sorry about that. I have
no worries.
Pasted the link in case it happens again.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. I mean, it's an online tournament. It's to be expected. So don't worry about it.
All right, mic check. Can the judges hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hope this goes. All right, starting time. I'm going to start on my opponent's case. My opponent extends the value of quality of life. But let's talk about the fallacy of arguing from consequence. How the heck is arguing quality of life material to whether something exists? The question of value and the question of existence is different. The only way that we actually accept my opponent's value is to accept my framework of whether we have trust or confidence in love as an institution as we have constructed it. So either my opponent has to reject their case and reject that value, or my opponent needs to accept my framework. With that, I would like to move on to their first contention. My opponent seems to have misunderstood the argument in my first contention. My opponent says that because love is an evolutionary drive, it exists and we should believe in it. But I turned this argument in my first contention. I say that because we can predict love as a physiological response, we should not and cannot think of it in the way that we have socially constructed it. And that's something I'm going to reference later. So basically, our two first contentions are the same, and the question is, who wins under which framing? My opponent moves on to say that philosophers believe in love, but the problem is that philosophers are being treated here as a monolith, saying Plato is influential, therefore we should listen to his thoughts on love, is almost cliche. I argued against my opponent in cross-ex about those who believe in solipsism, and my opponent admits that it's subjective. In short, there is no way to distinguish whether the solipsists are correct or Plato is correct merely by valuing philosophers. In short, just because a philosopher thinks something doesn't mean we can use quote-unquote philosophy as a guide. Finally, my opponent talks about love being the most powerful word. The reason I didn't address it is because the point is insubstantial. It is an emotional argument. I could say, I hate you, and that would be just as not useful in proving whether that something exists. I could say, I did this unspeakable thing, and that also doesn't say whether or not I did the atrocity. In short, just because love is part of our society and part of a construct doesn't mean that we can link it back to how my opponent says, that it somehow goes to quality of life. Further, I rebutted the idea of marriage being an automatic quality of life improvement twofold. First, in my second contention, where I talk about divorces, and second, where I talk about women who actually live less long due to the stress of marriage. Now, let's move on to my case. My opponent tries to cross-apply their first contention, saying that because we find love evolutionarily, we must reject my value. But that's the exact opposite of what I'm arguing. The reason I choose the value of love as uncontrollable destiny is because, for crying out loud, the resolution is referencing a song, and the song references a serious belief held in society that is incredibly, incredibly harmful. That is what the negative is built around. To briefly go over my case, I talk about love being isolated biologically with support from Scientific American and fMRI, and I talk about the social of constructive love, where I talk about it having worse outcomes in the case of divorce because people think it runs itself, and from MIT, where it basically preserves the caste system. With that, I would like to go on to my opponent's attacks on my first contention. And besides saying that they are fairly theoretical, we are again having the framework debate. My opponent says that because love can increase quality of life, we should quote unquote believe in it. But if it wouldn't require our belief, it wouldn't require our social propping up if it could demonstrate itself. And that's my attack on the first contention. My opponent responds in the second contention by saying that anything constructed by society can be harmful. But by admitting that, it is to admit to the terms of the debate here. Because if the love is constructed by society, which I argue, and it's harmful, then we should not believe in it. Finally, I'd like to talk about the key voting issues and just to re-examine the resolution. We could look at the dictionary and just say love exists, and that would make for a very meaningless resolution. Or we could look to the specific wording. I believe in a thing called love. This house believes in a thing called love. And look to the Darkness song, examine it, and realize that it actually has the prototypical romantic fantasy in our society. By picking that fantasy apart, we realize that it's harmful and isn't worth our belief. If you take our opponent's way, by opponent's way of evaluating this debate, you gain an incredibly redundant understanding, where the opponent is confused as to whether love exists and that's why we should value it, or love is good and it has good outcomes and that's why we should value it. My opponent should be conclusive as to which they're arguing.
Okay. 3 minutes. Starting now. So once again, I'd just like to formally thank my judges and or the judges and my opponent for coming out today. I think this has been a very constructive debate, and I'm so glad that I was able to participate in it with my opponent. I'd like to touch upon some of what my opponent said, as well as affirming why I believe that this house, or the affirmation, deserves the vote of the judges today. So to touch upon what some of my opponents said, he stated that love, or he defined love as uncontrolled destiny. He referenced specifically the song that the house was trying to reference here, and he included a couple of things about social constructions and framework on how love is essentially, according to my opponent, deriving people of self-agency. What I think is very interesting about this point is that self-agency is actually, I'm not going to bring up a new argument. I caught myself there. Excuse me. I'd like to point to the fact he said that women live shorter lives because of marriage. 1 year, correct? 1 year shorter lives. I think that love is not to blame for that, as I have specifically stated that love is purely existed in the subconscious, in the depths of our subconscious. If everyone could access the depths of our subconscious, we'd be a beautiful society. But the fact of the matter is, we cannot. So just to restate some of my 3 main points and evaluate what I think is important criteria to evaluate here. My opponent stated that you either believe in his framework or believe in my definition. Quite frankly, I believe that's not the case. Or excuse me, my criteria, I believe that's not the case. I believe the case at hand is the fact that love, no matter how you regard it, affects your quality of life. The way in which you choose to express it and the way in which you choose to live. My first point being, scientists have backed the existence of love as means of evolution. It derives from the depths of our subconscious and is a basic drive that millions of years ago, or that was evolved millions of years ago, in order to enable and focus our attention on just one process or one person, partner, and therefore bring about mating. I'd like to point to my second point, that philosophers believe in love. My opponent stated that why should we even believe philosophers? I mean, not everything they say is important. Some of them are just, or excuse me, not everything they say should be taken at face value. I believe he stated that, he mentioned solipsis and how everything could be subjective, which is something that I did concede to. Everything could be subjective, but I think that I believe that something such as something said by Plato in regards to love as being a heavenly blessing, in which the friendships of lover will center view. It is quite undebatable that love is present. It does have a very strong influence in society. And to my third point, that the most powerful word, or love is the most powerful word in all languages. As I repeated to you, or said back to you, the 911 call from a tower on 911, love is the only word that mattered to this man. So with that, I secede on my time, and I leave it to the judges for evaluation. Thank you.
All right, again, congratulations to both of our debaters. Obviously, since this is the gold round, you guys will figure out or hear your decision in the award ceremony. That will be live streamed later tonight. And so congratulations again to both debaters. You are dismissed from this room.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
And I'm sorry about the cutouts.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Again, internet tournament, it's rough.
Thank you.